Hello, and welcome to this reflection for Palm Sunday. And if any of you are wondering who I am, my name is Steve Mann. I serve the Methodist churches south of Ipswich down to the Essex border, the area known as the Ipswich Rural Mission area. And I want us to reflect upon Palm Sunday by considering four different groups of people. As Jesus enters into Jerusalem for the beginning of the Passover festival, first of all, there are the crowds who are already there, the crowds who are travelling up to Jerusalem alongside him. You've got hundreds and thousands of Jewish pilgrims coming up to Jerusalem, all excited, all very fervent in their faith, and all of them longing for a Messiah, waiting for God to send someone who will come and take away the Romans who are occupying not just Jerusalem, God's holy city, and Israel, but most likely the lands that they have travelled from as well. They are desperate for a Messiah. They cry out, "Hosanna, God save us," when Jesus is coming down the road. And remember as well that most of these people will be forming their first impressions of Jesus. In the Gospel accounts, as Jesus comes into Jerusalem, people are saying, who is this man? They don't know who he is. They have to be told he's Jesus, the prophet from Galilee. So they're forming their first impressions. And Jesus comes in determined now to let people know of his claim to be the Messiah. He starts from the Mount of Olives, fitting in with Old Testament prophecy, as the crowds would well have known. The Messiah appearing on the Mount of Olives. He rides in on a donkey, enacting prophecy from Zechariah. And the crowd play their part as well. They strew the road with their cloaks, bringing to mind another Old Testament story of King Joash. And what would also not have been lost on those first century pilgrims is the fact that in the story of the king who is coming riding on a donkey in Zechariah, he comes victorious because God has or will wipe out all of his enemies. And in the story of King Joash from the Old Testament, this is Joash's coronation ceremony as he rides on a donkey. But very soon afterwards he goes on what one commentator has described as a killing spree, again annihilating all of God's enemies. And so for those first century pilgrims, in their mind would have been this image of a forceful, a powerful Messiah. And had Jesus issued a call to arms and gone straight into the Antonia fortress, the Roman stronghold in Jerusalem, doubtless the crowds would have followed him, buoyed up as they were. But he didn't. And the week proceeded without any more hints of open rebellion. And then Jesus was arrested and imprisoned and put on trial. He wasn't the strong Messiah. He was simply an impostor, and maybe unsurprisingly, those shouts of Hosanna from Palm Sunday turned into cries of crucify when Pilate asked them to vote on Good Friday. Disillusionment quickly set in. And then the second group of people are the disciples. They end up disillusioned, but for different reasons. They probably still share, shouldn't, but they probably still share the crowd's expectations of Jesus coming powerfully to rule. I say they shouldn't because at Caesarea Philippi, when Peter acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah and then flatly told him that he was wrong in talking about the Son of Man coming to Jerusalem to suffer and die, Jesus put him right. But given that same Peter, when Jesus is arrested, takes a sword out and slashes away at people to stop Jesus being arrested, you suspect he still hasn't got the message. So they would have shared a lot of the crowd's expectations, but also for them it was personal. They had a lot invested in this. They argued among themselves as to, when they got the top jobs in the coming kingdom, who would be the greatest, who would be the most important, who would sit on the thrones next to Jesus. They knew or believed that they had 12 thrones reserved for them, but who would be on the greatest of those thrones? They very much bought into the cultural idea of, well, the reality in the culture of Jesus' day and in so many cultures today, that it's not what you know, it's who you know. That those who are in power appoint their family and friends to the top positions. And that's what they were looking for in God's coming kingdom, Jesus' coming kingdom. But again, they are disillusioned. Just a few hours after the crowd, but later that same Good Friday, when Jesus is pronounced dead on the cross, disillusionment sets in. All of their hopes and dreams are gone. And then the third group that we need to consider are the religious authorities. For them, Palm Sunday and Jesus' procession into Jerusalem is a continuation, because they've already made their mind up. They want Jesus eradicated. They want Jesus out of the way. And that comes from the raising of Lazarus, if you read John's account and what follows on from it. Because this happens very close to Jerusalem, and people are coming back and forth between Jerusalem and Bethany where it happens. And the speculation that Jesus might be the Messiah is growing and growing. And they say, this is just before the Passover festival. We can't risk anything. And as Jesus comes into Jerusalem, enacting the prophetic, or the prophecies about the coming Messiah, it must have filled them with horror. And that horror wasn't to do with Jesus being Messiah per se, but it was what flowed from that, what people might say and do, what the Romans might say and do as a response to that. And their neatly ordered world, in which they had some degree of religious autonomy and independence, would come crashing down around them. That was their fears. That was how they viewed the events of Palm Sunday. And what about the fourth group of people? That's us, you and me, people today. And you might say, well, we weren't there. We're 2,000 years away from the events as they unfolded then. But the issues that were floating around then are the issues that we face too. First of all, the issue that the crowd faced, wanting a God who would come and sort out the world, bringing God's rule, a new world order, a world where everything was in place. And people look to God to do the same today, to end world hunger, to end suffering, to end anything that we see that is wrong with the world, wars and everything else. And when God doesn't do that, when God is seemingly powerless or unwilling to intervene, other than in what seem like sort of small ways, then we can very quickly become disillusioned and turn our back on God. Or we can be like the disciples. Yes, we want that big picture change, but also we want God to be God of our lives as well, and for God to make everything okay in our lives. And we might be praying, say, for a close friend or family member who seemingly isn't healed in the way that we want them to be healed. God hasn't acted in our personal situation, or so it seems to us. And we can look for other things, and God doesn't answer our prayers in the way that we want them to be answered. And again, people can very quickly become disillusioned by God. Or we can be like the religious authorities. And you might say, well, No, that's the one thing I wouldn't be. I wouldn't want Jesus dead. But what were the driving motivations for the religious authorities? They weren't necessarily worried about Jesus' claim to be the Messiah, but they were worried about what people might say and do in response to that. And when Jesus comes to us, Jesus comes as the Messiah. He comes as the one sent to bring people to God, and he asks for our total commitment. And yet so often we hold back from that total 100% commitment. We're worried about what will happen to our world if we do make that kind of commitment to Jesus. What will our friends, our family, our neighbours say or do in response to that? And we're afraid that our neatly ordered world might come tumbling, crashing down if we push ourselves too far in the Jesus direction. So far, but at a safe distance. But Jesus asks for our total commitment. What I wonder is the opposite of disillusionment. I've been thinking about this. I'm not sure illusionment is a... Well, I'm sure illusionment isn't a word. My spell checker didn't like it. But we obviously know that the dis part at the beginning has to do with a negative. And I guess there's enough of illusion in illusionment to sort of get the impression that it has something to do with that word illusion. And of course, illusion and reality are two very different things. You only need to go to a magic show to see that. So disillusionment then is the rejection, the opposite of something that is an illusion, that isn't real. And for the crowds and the disciple, their disillusionment came because their disillusionment came because they had a wrong idea of Jesus. The image of God's Messiah that they had in their minds was an illusion and no more than that. It wasn't reality. Because in reality, God's plan had always been to send his Messiah, to send Jesus to change the world, yes, but to change it from the inside out rather than from the outside in. But maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself at the moment. Let's walk through the events of Holy Week through the next few days and see how the story unfolds for ourselves. Enjoy the journey.